What? Welcome to another episode of Silvie and Didy React. I'm Silvie,
And I'm Diddy.
and you might be wondering why we haven't been posting in a while. And part of it is just personal busyness, but another part of it is that we got a second debate with Dr. Evil. If you remember, we debated him about the existence of Jesus,
hmm
and this time we debated him about slavery
And a little bit of aliens.
and a little bit of aliens, which that will be coming out soon enough. But we would love for you to watch that when it comes out. In the meantime, we thought it'd be cool if we posted a video reacting to another video about slavery. This
Mhm.
one from famous skeptic Alex O'Connor.
So, Sylvie, if I tracked you right, we're
Mhm.
reacting to a reaction.
Yes, so he's actually reacting to another guy.
hmm
Uh,
Classic YouTube.
I know, right? This is some 3D reaction, you know? It's a
hmm
self-perpetuating system.
Exactly. Okay. So, do we need to set this up anymore? Or do we want to jump into the first clip?
We'll set it up in just a second, but before we
Okay.
do, don't
Yeah.
forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want to
Yes.
see more videos like this. And
Mhm.
if you comment and tell us what you want to see, we'll react to that. That's how
Yes.
cool you all are, and that's how
Yes.
slightly desperate we are. Nah, but we love to have interactions, so we're willing
Yes.
to do that.
Yeah, we discovered Dr. Evil through
Mhm.
interactions below one of the videos, and then all of a sudden we're debating him on YouTube.
Yeah,
What? That
yeah.
could be you, dear viewer.
The magic can always happen. And the second topic was chosen because somebody commented on his feed of the debate, the first debate, and that person decided what the topic of the second debate was going to be. So
Wow.
I know that better chances than the lottery. That's what we're saying here.
Much better.
Much better. All right. Well, let's set it up. So basically, as Diddy suggested, there is this Christian apologist who's trying to explain the concept of slavery in the Bible, and he's trying to say, here's why it is the way that it is, and here's maybe why you shouldn't assume certain things, and it's not as bad as you think. He's navigating a couple of claims about the Bible,
hmm
uh, and then Alex is responding. We're going to respond to two, I thought, two of his better arguments. Those were
Okay.
just like the arguments that I think were just generally applicable. So not like this person argued it poorly and Alex is responding to poor arguments,
I
but
see.
I would say strong arguments that any critic of slavery in the Bible and people who are saying, oh, the Bible's for slavery, we're going to challenge that concept. So let's
hmm
roll that first clip. And this clip is
Okay.
Alex responding to like, God was regulating slavery. And so this is Alex's response. And then we're going to react to his reaction.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So do you see the video?
We do.
Okay. And then please, once I start playing, let me know if you're getting sound.
Sure thing. I'm not getting sound.
Not getting sound. Okay. Classic.
I know. It's
Okay.
been a while,
So we're gonna
folks.
reset that. Let's stop the share. Let's try
Got
this again.
you clicking the share sound when you share?
You know, I did not. Thank you, Sylvie. Thank you.
It's always
Okay.
off. The default is off, which I never
I
get.
know, I know. Okay. So I jumped back a few seconds, probably a little bit too much.
But
Okay.
this is fine because
Perfect.
this is the original video. So this is the
Yeah.
Christian apologist. Number one, God did
Hate
not fix it.
slavery, but
I
rather
can
he
hear it now. We're good.
regulated it. And so, just like there were laws about murder and theft and polygamy and divorce, God knew that the hearts of people were evil, and so he had to establish laws that would regulate slavery.
Okay, stop. Yes, the Bible contains laws regulating murder, theft, polygamy, and divorce. But here's an important question. What are these regulations exactly? Well, let's see. The regulations on murder are don't do it. The regulations on theft are don't do it. Polygamy, divorce, yeah, don't do it. The laws regulating these things were not regulations, but explicit condemnations. Exodus 20:15, for instance, reads, "Thou shalt not steal." This leaves no room for confusion, and I wouldn't dream of arguing that the Bible endorses theft. The only, I'll repeat, the only appropriate regulation on slavery is its abolition. Anything less than
Stop.
this, at the very least, demonstrates that God doesn't.
Wow, it's getting very meta up here. So we're stopping his reaction to the reaction of okay. So to Steelman, his argument, slavery feels like it's a different type of thing compared to murder, theft, polygamy, and divorce laws. That's kind of
Hmm.
the argument that I think Alex is making
Hmm.
here.
Hmm.
And to a certain degree, there is some of that with theft. There's not a lot of like, oh, sometimes you can steal and sometimes you can't. But you actually do see more nuance and the first apologist's argument in some of these other things. So divorce, you see that in Matthew 19 when Jesus is talking about marriages between one man and a woman. Then the scholars came back and they said, well, then why did he permit us to give certificates of divorce?
Hmm.
And the response from Jesus was, because of the hardness of your hearts, Moses permitted you to divorce.
Mm.
Similarly, with murder, whereas murder is condemned and it's not so like, sometimes you can murder. I would say that the idea of killing was regulated. So there's a limitation of blood feuds by having sanctuary cities. So
Yeah.
even though we would say you shouldn't just out of revenge kill somebody for harming one of your family or your tribe, God in this time, in this period, because of the hardness of their hearts, is saying, look, you can't have unrestricted revenge killings. This has to be mitigated through the priests, and there have to be sanctuary cities so that we can pause and look at the case before you react. So I would actually say Alex O'Connor kind of brushing with too broad a stroke.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to
Yeah.
some degree, he is right, where there seems to be more permissiveness of slavery than, say, of theft.
Right. Yeah. Because you would say, with I guess our lens, you would say, well, theft is not as high tier a crime
Hmm.
as or theft theft is not as high tier an evil. I guess maybe
Hmm.
we could rephrase that as slavery is. Slavery, we would say, is like a top tier evil. Why would you ever want to do that? And
Exactly.
yet that is allowed.
Yeah.
Theft is a lower tier evil, and that is absolutely not allowed.
Hmm. And we've talked about this before in preparation for our debate, but just
Mhm.
there's also this concept of there is this environment of the times, which does matter. So context does matter, where people
Mhm.
are living just very rough lives. You can't imagine a society where there is no bank, there's no food bank, there's no social security, there's
There's no
nothing.
food security.
There's no food security. And that's why, like, for some of this slavery, if your crops die and you have nothing, like, what's going to happen to you? And so
Mhm.
there's a system instead of like, because you can't just get a loan from the bank or you can't go to the food bank, you have to basically become a slave or an indentured servant to a fellow Israelite.
Mhm.
We may not like that, but there's a reality. I like to give the analogy of Lost. Here are some civilized people coming to the island of Lost, the TV show, and then their response to like, Sawyer, the bad character, is stealing something. It's like they're gonna kick the crap out of him. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like civilized people don't do that. Yeah, but when you're on this island and there's food scarcity and there's like
Yeah.
this intenseness, it's like you do have to respond more firmly. So I think that there's a
Absolutely.
context that can be missed when you're saying like, oh, like what do you mean regulation? The only acceptable regulation is abolition.
Mhm.
Um, those
Yeah, but then
infrastructures, yeah,
well, I would think I was about to say what you were about to say. It's like, yeah, it's easy to say, yeah, let's not have slavery, but then what do you do? Like, how do you start regulating loaning money out to someone and what you're allowed to get in return?
yeah.
Right. So if I lend Sylvie 100 shekels or whatever denarii,
Hmm.
whatever currency they used back then, how do I ensure that you're going to pay me back?
Yeah.
And of course, to a certain extent, as a Christian, we would say, well, you know, don't expect too much in return. But
Yeah.
that's no way to found a society, though.
Yeah.
So
I guess two more points under this issue. The first is just that in the context of that day. So, like, it's not just as if the Bible creates slavery, which is the original point, and it's true. The Bible doesn't create slavery. Slavery is this universal that exists. But what
mhm.
it does do is it mitigates it. And you do see that in those laws, which will be the next clip.
Okay.
But
So do
then
we want to go ahead and jump to the next one? Or oh, you
well,
have
I was
another
going to say
point.
one final thought on that is in First Samuel 8. So like kind of this idea that Alex makes is God can never disapprove of something, but then also permit it. And we just that's not the case. If you look at, for example, First Samuel 8, there's been this prohibition against kings ruling over the Israelites because they're meant to
Yeah.
be free people. They're meant to rely on God as their king. They're not supposed to have that kind of government structure that will then centralize power,
Mm-hmm.
accumulate wealth,
Mm-hmm.
increase war, like all of these bad things.
Yeah.
But then they demand it anyways. And not only does God allow it, but then he gives regulations for here's how the king is supposed to act.
Right.
So it's very consistent, at least for the God of the Bible, to have these things where he does not want it,
Mm-hmm.
but he's also not going to just say, all right, I said no, but whatever. He's going to still mitigate it, even when it's bad, even when, as Jesus said, because of the hardness of your hearts, this was permitted.
Mm-hmm.
That's a knock on humans. That's not a knock on God's character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Sorry. Now I've rambled, so we can go on to the next.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I believe it was 1348.
That's right. So this one, Alex is responding to this idea of like, oh, like look at how humane the slavery system was. And Alex is going to be like, what are you talking about?
21, we've still got problems. How were these servants treated? Well, let's take a look at one of these regulations, shall we? Exodus chapter 21, verses 20 to 21. And this verse comes just after the one the guy quoted in the video regarding Hebrew servants. Anyone who beats their male or female slaves with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result, but they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. Okay, so it's perfectly permissible to mercilessly beat your slaves with a rod as much as you want, and this should only be punishable if the slave dies as a, quote, direct result. If
All
they
right,
get up after a
pause.
few days, everything's fine. In what
So just as a quick aside for that one, the technical word also includes the understanding of avenged, which is the idea of killing. So you avenge a master that's killed a slave. You don't avenge or kill a master who's beaten his slave.
Okay. So
Yeah.
this is like if you're like the point you made earlier, like if a family member of yours went into indentured servitude for someone
Yep.
and then they ended up dying,
Yes.
you're saying the word is like that person's family coming and taking revenge for that
Yeah,
death.
well, yes. So it's like the idea is like of the word punished can be vague, like, oh, like they don't get anything for doing that. That's not what it says. Like the word is avenged, and like it's in the context of like some other laws that deal with if a free person kills another free person, this is the penalty that has to happen to them. If they did it
Okay.
premeditatingly, like they must be avenged. Like, so there's this idea of punished is sometimes a vague word in English, but avenged, I would say, is a much stronger word. It connotes like it kind of gives the meaning of the harsher consequence than just like punished, which could be anything.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's the like first bit, and then like the second bit, like no, that's not just you can mercilessly beat your slave, because in another part of the Hebrew slave code, you'll find that if you knock out a slave's tooth, they have to go free. If you like blind them in one eye. So if you destroy an eye, they go free.
Hmm.
And also for sex slavery, which is highly controversial. If you don't treat that slave as a wife, providing for her needs, honoring her in that way, you have to compensate her and she goes free.
Mm.
So there is this sense that even within a brutal system, there are standards.
Mm.
Yeah.
So essentially what you're saying is, so in this context of you have a slave and you have relations with her,
Hmm.
um, you have to then start treating that slave as your wife.
Yes. And you can't sell her to somebody else.
Yeah.
Um,
It's basically like protecting her.
Protecting her honor, basically.
Yes, yes,
Um,
that's what I was looking for.
yeah, yeah, and that's true whether it's a Hebrew slave or, and he's going to mention this later, if this is a slave from conquest, like if you marry this person
Hmm.
and then you mistreat them, you can't just sell them again. Like they're to be considered your wife,
Yeah,
like with those rights.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So did you say that there was more?
Yeah,
Um,
so sorry, I paused prematurely, but just like that's an important point that needs to be made where it's like, no, it's not just like you can do whatever, but there's
yeah.
a distinction between beating a slave and beating them to death. And when you beat them
Hmm.
to death, there are consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What world should we consider this acceptable moral guidance? Even if we grant that the slavery being talked about here is more like a kind of employer-employee situation, this would be an unacceptable way to treat any employee. Imagine if your boss could beat you as much as he wanted as long as you didn't die. It's ridiculous. You, Mr. Videomaker, were the one who brought up the regulations on slavery, and you were the one who quoted Exodus 21 to defend your position. All I'm doing is actually looking up the things that you're referencing in the Bible and actually reading what's there. Maybe you should try it sometime. The regulations of slavery in the Bible are exactly what you'd expect from a book that refers to these slaves as property. They're awful, indefensible, superstitious idiocy that deserve the same historical condemnation as the legalities surrounding the slave trade in the USA. And this is still only in reference to Hebrew slaves. Elsewhere in the Bible, we see what's condoned when enslaving people from foreign nations, such as the Midianites. In Numbers chapter 31, verses 17 to 18, Moses instructs the following: "Now kill all the boys, and kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man." Now, what use could these men possibly have for keeping all the virgin girls, quote, for themselves? I wonder. Why aren't we seeing a defense of
Pause.
verses like this?
Okay, so that's basically the clip. And he raises, I will say this, as much as we're saying like, he missed this, he missed that. These are very valid concerns, and it's
Hmm.
good that you should be concerned about those things. If you were just
Hmm.
like, oh yeah, there's no problem. Some people are by nature slaves. That would be a serious problem. Like, so it's good. It's good that there are people that say like, this is unacceptable. Why would we
Yeah.
want to tolerate this?
Right.
Keep thinking that way. That being said, he said this is only for Hebrew slaves. That's not true. There are some Hebrew specific commandments about letting people go free after like 6 years of work. So for the economic slavery. But then there are rules which just say slaves, and they apply whether it's the what we talked about before. If you knock out the tooth, if you blind the eye, that person goes free. That's not a distinction of Hebrew versus foreign slaves. Treating the sex slave as a wife versus as a slave,
Mm.
that's like that's regardless of whether they're Hebrew or not. And this is
Which would then
yes,
apply in that situation that he just quoted in Numbers, where
yes,
these soldiers take the virgin girls for themselves. Well,
yes,
they would then be treated as wives.
yes. And that will be a good topic for another time because this touches on the idea of genocide and the wars of conquest that Israel fought.
Mm.
And that's a really touchy one. That deserves another thing. For the meantime, I would suggest watch a video by Gavin Ortland, and I'll link that in the video.
Okay.
Does a great job talking about the what these wars of conquest really were like, and kind of the common interpretation that they just killed everybody really doesn't stick for multiple reasons, but that's a good one to look at. But for this one, it would help to see the context of what was the standard of that day. And the standard of that day was you just have that slave. Um, you don't have to marry them. You can immediately have sex with them and rape them. Whereas in the Hebrew Bible, you have to give them a period of mourning. You have to observe certain rites and rituals before you can claim them as a wife. And like we said before, they have rights if you do not honor them.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Code of Hammurabi, the Code of the Hittites, there's this sense that you could still sell them as a slave if they didn't bear you children. And that's not even just the slaves of conquest. That's any slave. Like if you get a female slave, you can do that.
Hmm.
There's no restriction. Those are things that just like in comparison, like I don't think you could say it's like, ah, like this is still horrible. It's like the difference between a splinter and the Black Plague. Splinters are bad, but equating them with Black Plagues is bad because it diminishes how deadly that other form of evil is.
Mm.
And so you look
Yeah.
at that, you even look at, we might get canceled for this, but like the Islamic campaigns, when they're allowed to like immediately like rape the women and then sell
Yeah.
them for slaves. Like
Yeah.
that's not what you see here. And there are rules that hide that because it's so horrible,
Hmm.
because you're trying to downgrade it from the Black Plague to even, let's say, an infection or gangrene. Like you want to diminish the evil wherever you find it. I think
Yeah.
that's the big principle there.
Yeah. So would you, so I guess this might be really weird to say then. Would you say in some ways what we call slavery in the Bible, which you've kind of made the argument in some cases is yes, like slavery, perhaps, but then in other cases it's more of an indentured servitude. So would you
Um,
say in some way, I guess where I'm trying to go, if you can agree or disagree with what I just said, but and would you say that God is basically giving an institution to sort of help regulate society
I,
in
I would
some ways?
actually say that he's reforming an already existing institution. The institution of
Okay.
slavery exists not because God just told them you can start collecting slaves and everybody
Right.
didn't know what that was.
Right.
But he is drawing some very hard lines in an institution that was very merciless. If you look at the
Yeah.
surrounding nations and the context, and even in Islam, like that comes later. I mean, Alex O'Connor likes the Enlightenment. Thomas Jefferson had his own slave girl that he did not treat as a wife, did not free. When they were in France, and technically she was free, he pressured her to remain his slave concubine. And he did
Wow.
not free the children until his death
The children
of this marriage or of this,
of
I guess,
this
sexual
concubine.
relationship. Yes.
Wow.
So this is an enlightened person
Hmm.
who supposedly knows better, and he doesn't even rise to the level of what Alex O'Connor is calling inexcusable and evil. He doesn't even rise to that level of, you at least have to treat them like a wife. You at least, have to give them all these privileges, and the children, like, they're your offspring. You can't just make them slaves.
Right.
But Thomas Jefferson does that.
Yeah.
The Muslims did that. Like that's something that we don't like to think about.
Hmm.
I guess what I would say is I think all of these, even the economic slavery, it's still slavery. Um,
Yeah.
it's just like the way that we think of slavery tends to be, and you see that with Alex, is like the Atlantic slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade is so different. I can see why people don't want to just use the word slave.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say maybe involuntary servitude because there's a certain level of involuntariness of like if you're desperate and destitute and basically you're forced
You have
into
no other options, basically.
exactly, yeah. And so I would be willing to say like and even just that's why I'll use labels like economic slavery because economic slavery is different from what I would call the Atlantic slave trade, which is chattel slavery. Chattel
Yeah.
slavery is you treat them like one of your animals. They have no discernible rights.
Hmm.
Um, I love America, but like up until like I want to say the 1740s, they didn't even have penalties for killing your slaves.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't until the late 18 or the early 1800s where you actually might be charged with murder. Between that time, it's like you had to pay a fine if you killed your slave. So like the brutality even of the Atlantic slave trade can't be compared to what the Bible is telling you. So like the Atlantic slave trade is just this huge reverse and regress beyond the level of even the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of people that tried to justify themselves and say, well, like, here's the verses, obey your masters. But then they didn't look at the verses that said, hey, if you knock out that slave's tooth, they have to go free.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So like a lot there that they didn't look at and they didn't live up to that standard.
Hmm.
But yeah, I would say that it is part of the institution of slavery, and there are different gradations. So maybe like, if we were to use a scale of 1 to 10, where it's like one could be the economic slavery, which like you work a certain period of time and then you're free. And
Hmm.
then 10 would be like the gulags of Russia, where it's like you were a political slave, basically, and the purpose was to kill you. Like there's a whole bunch of difference between those levels of slavery.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you think, Diddy? You got all
Yeah.
my reactions. Let's get your reaction.
No, no. Yeah. I understand. Well, one, I'm not, um, I'm just letting you talk because you were the one that sort of prepped for the debate and everything. So you have a lot more to say on the topic, and a lot more defenses that you can bring. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like I've heard your arguments multiple times, but there's still like a kernel of truth to what people would just simply say is like, why does the Bible have slavery at all?
Mm,
Like I understand the arguments, and then it's so easy for me to then say, okay, we're spending so much time um talking about like we're spending all this like the skeptic part of me, because all of us have a little bit of skeptic. It's good to have some skepticism. So the
mm,
skeptic part of me is still like, we're why do we have to spend so much time to support to get around this to kind of skirt around this topic of slavery in the Bible? You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
we're kind of spending all of this thought, energy to do that, whereas other things, it's just like a very simple, like, yeah, God said don't murder, you know, and
Yeah.
and we're all on board with that. It makes sense. So part of me still just is like, can't get over that, but it's a small part. But then, as you've now said multiple times, like we've had other discussions off camera or off the microphone about this, and logically, I definitely fully I grasp a lot of the arguments. And
Mhm.
like the lost analogy that you like to make, where if you were to take modern civilized folks and transport them to a situation, Lost, or what's Survivor, like
Yeah.
all of these shows where it's like you no longer have the institutions that you're used to have. You no longer have a banking system, right? So you're going to start bartering, right? You immediately go back to these tried and true things, and it's like, okay, you no longer have prisons, so how are you going to punish someone for, um, doing something to you?
Yeah.
Um, and so it's like in that logical sense, it's like, okay, yeah, I understand. I've lent out a significant amount of money to this person to help them. They're not paying me back, so I have to have some way to kind of recoup that loss, so they'll work for me for a time. Or they have nothing and then they just decide, okay, I'll work for you because all of my crop died. I'm just gonna work for you for a while until we call it even. I'm sure there are rules and regulations regarding that that I can't think of right now, but so it makes sense from that standpoint. But then part of me is just like, but there's still slavery.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, I don't know if there's anything else you can say to assuage that part of my brain or a part of the
Yeah.
viewer's brain that may still be thinking that.
Well, I'll say this in my closing remark, and that's I think one of the things that's difficult here is we're encountering a sin and an evil that those people struggled with. Every generation has some sort of evil or moral deficiency
Mm,
that they struggle with, and I'm
yeah,
sure that previous and later generations will look at that and say, "What was your problem?" And we've solved this. Like we have the right reasons and we've come to the right conclusions. And I think that there can be some arrogance about like we finished this, we solved this, why couldn't you? And that's coming from a place of privilege where,
yeah,
we've because of a civil war, all of these reforms that took thousands of years now gives us that position to say that.
mhm,
But it was a long and difficult road, as I'm sure
yeah,
that there are lots of things we do that will be a long and difficult road. And generations after us will say, how could you not get that?
yeah,
Like, so that's the thing that I would say is like, I think that like it's hard for us to see when people struggle and they don't immediately get the right answer.
yeah.
And it's obvious that they're having to work at it and
Hmm.
in an indirect way.
Hmm. Do we have any more time, or are we
One for your closing thoughts.
okay? How much time?
You got about 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure, viewer, we're on a time crunch now. We don't have Skype that can record for
Uh,
24 hours. We never tested that before it went away, but
hmm.
um so Sylvie, one of the things that you just said, like looking at a generation and seeing their sin.
Hmm.
I'm reading a science fiction novel right now that is takes place in the year 3000, and this
Hmm.
is like a post-apocalyptic, like aliens have taken over, very few humans left, and it's kind of a story of them rising up against the alien overlords.
Hmm.
um but one of the interesting things is that part of the process of the aliens coming in is that they had an arm, like, so it was sort of the intergalactic mining initiative that came in and said, okay, Earth has some really valuable resources, we're going to take it over and start mining it for resources. um, and there's a piece of that, that was basically like, oh, let's capture what the culture of Earth was before we destroyed it. So they were kind of capturing like human culture. And I'm getting to my point very quickly here. um, One of the pieces of it was they were like, the humans worshipped a lot of different gods, and one of these gods was called Bank, and they had very many different churches to this god. So you saying that we're seeing the sin of a prior generation, it's like, here's, and obviously the author is taking liberties, but here's a situation where we're like, you're kind of coming in with an outside perspective of what Earth is.
Hmm.
I totally get the idea that you could just look at things and say like, who is this Bank that all
Yeah.
of these humans are worshiping?
Yeah.
you know and yeah, we certainly have our things that we're struggling with, and how society functions and um how it's institutionalized. But so yeah, that actually makes a lot more sense to me, where in a way we're getting a glimpse of the past. And as you pointed out, right, we're seeing this moment where these laws are handed down, and like you said, slavery is a universal institution. And then later on, when the nation of Israel is becoming more established, and they actually have kind of, like solidified their rule of the land, the people start clamoring, "Hey, we need a king. We need someone to
Yeah.
lead us." It's
Hmm.
like, guys, are you not understanding the relationship that I've had with you for the past years? Like kind of talking as God there for a second. Not that I, uh,
Yeah. Yeah, no, no,
am
that's a good
claiming
point.
that I should be able to, but like, it's like, yeah, God's been leading them, but these people are still like, oh no, we need a leader though.
Mm, yeah,
um, and so God gives them rules for having a king, even though, to your point, he did not want to do that up to that point. He wanted them to be a free people. Um,
exactly.
so yeah, yeah, I think contextualizing it, and I think it'll still take some time to, because there's still part of us that's like, of course, yeah, slavery bad. It's like an automatic response.
Mm,
So rewiring that, not that I'm saying we should rewire that slavery is bad, viewer, but just in the sense of talking about the Bible and what the Bible is actually saying and what the Bible is actually supporting, um, and how we should think about that.
yeah,
It'll take a little bit to rewire that part of my brain.
yeah. And we need some humility to realize that those people struggled.
Yeah.
Like they couldn't easily come to the solution. And we have those too. Trust me. Next, like generations after us will wonder, why did we do these things? Why couldn't we just have like done the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's good to ask those questions and demand better.
Yeah, Sylvie,
Yeah,
when God parted the waters for you and allowed you to escape from Egypt, why did you not just continue blindly trusting God that He'll lead you through the wilderness and the desert? Come on.
exactly.
Come on, it's so
Exactly.
easy. He just parted the ocean for you.
Yeah. Yep. Well, viewers and listeners, thank you for listening. We will be back with more. I'm Sylvie.
And I'm Diddy.
Peace.